Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Margery Gans, and I'm a member of the board of the Writers' Room of Boston. I am delighted that you could join us this evening for the July reading in our virtual series, Readings from the Room, which began in March 2021. For anyone who's new to us, the Writers' Room of Boston is a co-working space in downtown Boston for any and all writers, established and emerging, who want or need a quiet place to write. The room is open 24 hours a day, and it provides desks and silence and the quiet companionship of other writers. The room has been serving writers of the greater Boston area since 1993. And during and since the pandemic, the room has been offering online resources, including this reading series, and an online writing group with prompts and discussions. In January, we inaugurated a series of interviews with guests knowledgeable about, for example, getting your work to a publisher, agents, and guidance for online publishing. Please contact us if you're curious or have any questions about the room and its programs, and check out our Facebook and Instagram posts at Writers of Boston. Our website has photos, announcements, and that's where you can find recordings of past readings from the room. We would be delighted to have new members and have different levels now of membership, including a virtual membership for those who can't easily make it to the room. If you're interested, please check out our website, writersroomofboston.org. In 2021, we launched this new reading series as a way to reach out to the writing community during the pandemic and share the wonderful writing from both established and emerging writers. We've been lucky enough to have writers from different backgrounds, representing a range of genres, and also some readers from around the country, which we've been able to do thanks to Zoom. And some of our writers have called the Writers' Room home or have been fellows at the room. This series is made possible by grants from the Mass Cultural Council and the Boston Cultural Council, and we also rely on friends. So if you enjoy this program, please consider making a contribution using the donate button on the website. Also, we will be recording this reading, and a replay will be available on our website. Tonight we have 3 readers, Jennifer Chow, Jeffrey Feingold, and Mary Beth O'Connor. As we go along this evening, feel free to use the question and answer feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can type in your questions. We'll have time for discussion at the end. Our first reader is Jennifer Chow. Jennifer Chow writes cozies filled with hope and heritage. She is an Agatha, Anthony, and Lefty Award-nominated author. Her forthcoming series is the Magical Fortune Cookie Mysteries, and her most recent series is the LA Night Market Mysteries. Death by Bubble Tea was reviewed by the New York Times, featured in Woman's World, and hit the SoCal Indie bestseller list. Also, Kirkus Review described her latest novel, Hot Pot Murder, this way, quote, great characters and a delightful mystery filled with luscious descriptions of food. Jennifer currently serves as president on the board of Sisters in Crime and blogs at chicksonthecase.com. She's an active member of Crime Writers of Color and Mystery Writers of America. You can find her online at jenniferjchow.com. Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here tonight and just appreciate being able to read. And I'm Jennifer Chow. I write cozies, which are a subgenre of mysteries. They're basically whodunits that are in the vein of Murder, She Wrote, but my books come with an Asian American twist to them. My latest series is the LA Night Market Mysteries, and it has 2 cousins with opposite personalities who run a food stall at their local Los Angeles night market. I'll be reading from excerpts from both the books in my series tonight. So the first is called Death by Bubble Tea. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single woman in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a book. To that end, I strolled with purpose from my residence to the literary Narnia to retrieve my paycheck a few days early, and splurge on a tome. Even after having worked in said bookstore for nearly 5 years, or perhaps because of my extended tenure, I still recommended the literary Narnia to family, acquaintances, and strangers. I provided the recommendations not to increase our customer base and secure my financial stability, but because I truly believed in the message of our store. The two Japanese-American sisters who ran it, Dawn and Kelly Tanaka, always spread new books featuring female main characters out on the front display table and complemented these with other classic books about women and a prominent placement on a book carousel. At the cash register, I noticed that only Dawn stood at the counter to ring up my purchase. Maybe Kelly was taking a break in the back room. Sometimes she napped in the uncomfortable metal folding chair we had there. I plunked down the domestic thriller on the counter and idly looked at the paperback classics on the book stand. My eyes were immediately drawn to my usual Jane Austen favorite. I loved Pride and Prejudice, and my old copy was all tattered with the words almost rubbed off of the title. Should I add it to the pile? It wouldn't be a prudent purchase. I was also considering getting takeout from that new kebab place for lunch on the way home from the bookstore. I gripped the edge of the counter tight to stop myself from temptation as I said, "Just the one book, please." Dawn picked up the huge tome and flipped it around. To reach the back cover, she aimed the scanner at the barcode and hesitated. "This is a lot of money, Yale, and I know you're on a tight budget. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider, given..." I gave Dawn a pleasant smile. I tended to pretend I knew what people were blathering about to cover up the fact that I didn't have the slightest clue. "You're really taking the news well," she said. "It's only because of the lack of customers. We love your presence. But my sister and I can barely make ends meet as it is. We had to cut corners somewhere. I don't think we even make minimum wage at this point." I opened my mouth to speak, closed it, and then opened it again. "Are you telling me that I no longer work here?" Her cheeks turned an alarming shade of pink. "Oh, I thought Kelly already told you." "When is my last day?" "Monday." She fiddled with her spectacles. "I'm so sorry. We ran the numbers yesterday and just couldn't figure out how to keep you on. People don't really walk into bookstores anymore, and we've never been good with that internet thing." Monday would be my last day in this beautiful shop that I called my home away from home. I almost staggered from the sudden physical pain in my gut. In the end, I distracted myself by going to Wing Fat to eat dim sum with my cousin Celine and my dad. When we finished the meal, with enough leftovers to stock my empty fridge, Bob sat back in his upholstered chair with his red silk cushion and wiped his mouth with a white cloth napkin. His dark brown eyes looked at both Celine and me, seeming to gleam with unbridled joy. "I have a proposition for the pair of you." "Yes, Uncle?" Celine leveled her doe-like eyes at my dad. "Yale's been hounding me to make these new snacks for the restaurant, but I know most of my customers want traditional dim sum and Cantonese dishes. I've decided instead to sell them at the new night market being held tonight and tomorrow at Eastwood Village. It'll be in the shopping plaza near where Yale lives. Well, what's it called again?" Bob turned toward me. "The Shops at Eastwood Village." Celine fluttered her long lashes at the possibility of a bustling night market or a shopping expedition. I wasn't sure which. Bob continued. "Anyway, I'd have to cut short closing duties at Wing Fat for me to even make it and set up before the 11 o'clock opening time. Since you're in town, Celine, why don't you and Yale run it together this weekend?" I managed to stop short of choking my Bolé tea. "A night market?" Celine said, tapping one manicured nail against her pointy chin. "That would be fun. And I assume there'll be different foods to check out." Bob nodded with enthusiasm. "Of course, but not only food stalls, also games, crafts, and even entertainment." Celine seemed to catch my dad's enthusiasm. She whipped out her phone and said, "Sounds fab. I'll get so many great shots for Instagram." My dad looked at her in confusion. His flip phone didn't make him a huge expert on tech. "Is that a social media?" Bob asked. "I heard you want to make things go sick on it." "You mean viral," Celine said, "and I'm a foodstagrammer. I take pictures of food." "Ah, that's why you were taking photos of the dim sum earlier." "It's for your job," Bob said. "Kind of," Celine said, averting her gaze and sliding her phone back into her slouchy leather purse. Maybe I wasn't the only one who needed to hunt for gainful employment. Of course, Don and Kelly still had 3 days left to change their minds. Bob beamed at the both of us. Naturally, you two would keep any profits made. I couldn't pass up a chance to pad my meager savings account. My dad started clearing the dim sum and putting them into takeout containers. Celine, you can handle the social media and marketing side. Yale, you're in charge of the food and drinks. I turned to my cousin. Meet you at 10 in the plaza to set up the stall, Celine? I'll be there with heels on, she said. I think you meant with bells on. I know what I said. See you then. She thanked my dad for the delicious meal and strolled out of the restaurant. And then the second excerpt is from book 2 in the series. It just came out last month. It's called Hot Pot Murder. All happy hot pot gatherings are alike. Each unhappy hot pot event is disastrous in its own way. It started off early with the invitation from Nicola Ho, continuing his trend of irritating me ever since we were middle school academic rivals. Nick had now single-handedly ruined my plans for a quiet Thanksgiving dinner with my nearest and dearest beside me. The holiday was one of the few times that Ba actually shut down his dim sum restaurant, Wing Fat, and focused on family. The Thanksgiving gathering had been billed as the meeting of minds for the local Asian restaurant business community. They even had an official title for their group, Asian American Restaurant Owners Association, or AROA. Once I'd known about the revised Thanksgiving, I offered up Wing Fat as a logical place to gather. We had plenty of space for guests. Wing Fat had a whole banquet room to fill it with people and food. Nick declined our offer and said everybody should meet up at his mother's restaurant, Ho's, and he won the argument. I was surprised the Thanksgiving meal wouldn't be at Jeffrey Vu's eatery, actually. I figured as the president of AROA, he'd be ready to jump in with the meeting location. Then again, maybe he didn't want to deal with the cleanup on his day off. At the hot pot Thanksgiving dinner, Celine made sure to take several photos of the food as it bubbled away. I knew she'd post those pics on Instagram. The problem of having only one burner to share was that we all crowded around the boiling food to grab tidbits. With our chopsticks diving into the pot for tasty morsels, I wondered if we looked like clamoring seagulls. It also meant that while our elders leisurely sat to enjoy their meal, the rest of us youngsters had to pop up out of our booth and dash across the aisle to refill our bowls. It came as no surprise to me that 10 mouths to feed meant one round of hot pot ended quickly. We all admitted some sort of dissatisfaction at needing to wait for a second helping of veggies and meat to cook before getting to eat again. Misty wrapped the end of her braid around her fingers. Nick tapped an irritating beat on the floor with his shoe, and even Mr. Yamada gazed at the pot with searing intensity as though willing it to boil faster. As the time stretched out, Jeffrey said, "Maybe I'll look for an extension cord." He excused himself from the elder's booth. Within minutes, he came back out holding a long cord. "Found it," he almost sang out, "right next to the sink." What an odd placement. I wondered if Nick's mother had used it for something else and had just forgotten with the hot pot preparations. Jeffrey connected the plug of the lonely burner on our table with the extension cord. Then he ambled behind the counter. "Remember," he said, "after we have our share of delicious hot pot, we'll discuss the association's path for next year, including leadership options." "The faster we eat, the quicker we'll meet," Derek said. "Plug it in, Jeffrey." "Okay," Jeffrey said, squatting below the counter. "Here's the socket. I wonder why this is so..." A strange gargle came from Jeffrey's location behind the counter. Sharp sizzling and the acrid smell of burnt flesh dirtied the air. For a moment, we all froze. Then we jolted into action. "Are you all right, Mr. Vu?" I asked as I sprinted around the corner, afraid of what I'd find.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Now we all have to hear the rest of it, though. That's the thing. Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Our next reader is Jeffrey Feingold. And Jeffrey is a writer in Boston. His stories, which are forthcoming in 2 collections in print from publishers in the US and England, have been nominated for the PEN America Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers, the Pushcart Prize, and the Best American Short Stories. He's finalist for the Islands Book Awards in Greece, shortlisted and longlisted for the Exeter Story Prize, and winner of London's Superlative Literary Journal Annual Short Story Prize. Jeffrey's work appears in magazines such as the International Intrepid Times and in The Bark, a national magazine with readership of over 250,000. Jeffrey's work has also been published in anthologies and by numerous literary reviews and journals, including The Pinch, Magdalen House, Wilderness House Literary Review, Schuylkill Valley Journal, and elsewhere. Jeffrey's stories about family, about the tension between heritage versus assimilation, about love, loss, regret, and forgiveness, reveal a sense of absurdity tempered by a love of people and their quirky ways. Jeffrey.
Thank you so much, Margery. And thank you, everybody at the Writers' Room for making this possible and for everybody joining tonight. The story I'm going to read is the title story from my second book, There Is No Death in Finding Nemo. It's the shortest story in the book. And that book is a book of linked short stories. The stories are linked in a couple of ways. One is that each of the stories focuses a great deal on psychological realism and has sort of everyday types of people and characters. There's a doctor, a teacher, a baker, a violin student. And two of the characters, Mary and Phil, who take the lead in this story I'm going to read you, which is the last story in the book, the title story, as I mentioned. Those characters appear in several stories throughout the book, as do some other characters. So that's another way that the stories are linked. Mary and Phil appear in the first story and then in a story in the middle of the book, as well as in this final story. In the earlier stories, each of the appearances is when Mary is giving advice, generally unsolicited, probably unwanted advice to the protagonist in another story, who also happens to be her sister. And as she's giving advice in those other stories, she's also arguing with Phil at the same time, who's also trying to give advice. And so we find out more about these characters before, these two characters, Mary and Phil, before we see them in the end in this brief story in which they take the title role, as I mentioned. So that said, here is There Is No Death in Finding Nemo. Excuse me. Phil opened his eyes to see glass just inches from his face. He looked left, then right. He rotated his eyeballs 360 degrees. He saw glass in all directions. Although the glass was clear, he could see smudges and the lip running along the top of the bowl. He felt disoriented. He looked down, saw no body. Mary's digital alarm clock was next to him on her bedside table. Is my head in a fishbowl? I must be dreaming. I'll just close my eyes and return to sleep. Before drifting off, Phil remembered arguing with Mary over supper last night. It was a pitched, hurtful battle, starting as it usually did with the toilet paper. You left the toilet paper going the wrong way, Mary had said. It's supposed to hang over the top of the roll. But I put the seat down, Phil said. Yes, but the toilet paper was wrong, Mary said. I don't want to talk about this right now, Phil said. You never want to, Mary said, impaling a Brussels sprout with her fork. You never want to talk about anything. That's not true. Especially not about feelings, Mary said, because you have no feelings. You're empty inside, Phil, just a head in a jar. Empty, selfish. Selfish, Phil said. Was it selfish when I offered to support your new pottery studio? How about when I said we could try to adopt after the fertility treatments failed? After 10 years and enough money for half a house? You were always the master of the grand gesture, Mary said, but you're selfish with your feelings. Do you even have them? What the hell does that mean, Phil said, raising his voice. Jesus, it's never enough, is it? You've never been happy, Mary. You'll never be happy. I'm sorry we couldn't have children. I'm sorry the adoption fell through. I've tried to... You have no emotional intelligence, Mary said. I do all the worrying. I bear all the anxiety. You go to work, make money, that's fine, but it's all you do. That's not a marriage. It's not being on a team. Do you know, in our 19 years together, I've never seen you cry? You're the only man in my entire life I've never seen cry. That's ridiculous, Phil said. Oh? I cried when Nemo died, Phil said. I cried quite a lot, he said, a bit smugly, whether because he thought he had just proved Mary wrong or himself right, or perhaps because he thought he had just confirmed his humanity. Right, okay, Mary said. Once. Once you cried when the dog died. And what grown man calls a dog Nemo? Nemo is a fine name, Phil said, and there's no death. What? Mary said. There's no death in Finding Nemo. It's a great movie and a great dog name. Not for a Great Dane. You must grow up, Phil, Mary said heatedly. Who has ever heard of a husband who won't cry in front of his own wife, except over a dog named Nemo? And the fucking toilet paper. You always turn the roll around the wrong way. Every time. Recalling Mary's return to their eternal battle over the toilet paper roll caused Phil to roll his eyes as his head floated in the jar, like Nemo darting in and out of plastic coral when he is imprisoned in a dentist's aquarium. Phil closed his eyes. He reopened them in Italy, sitting on a high window ledge on a temperate Venetian morning. He opened the shutters, the better to see and hear the musician playing accordion as he strolled along the cobblestones below. The warm breeze fluttered the pink chiffon curtains across his cheek. He swept the curtains aside with the back of his hand as he looked behind him, at Mary, asleep on their honeymoon bed. As she rested atop golden satin sheets, hair the length of a hollyhock stalk, as black as the impenetrable blackness of black hollyhock petals, as it trailed along the length of her long bronzed limbs, he wished he could paint her portrait. He couldn't paint. Couldn't draw a straight line. He looked out the window at a man paddling a gondola along the side canal which ran by the hotel. Phil's heart ached with such bliss, he thought if he died on the spot, it would be just fine. He'd already reached the top of the mountain. If he fell off, so be it. There was nowhere higher to ascend. He knew this love would last forever. I'm in the mood for Chinese tonight, Mary said. She sat on the edge of the bed, flicked on the table lamp by the alarm clock and the fishbowl. What do you think of cashew chicken with rice? I don't think I've the stomach for it, Phil said. Coward, Mary said. It's not that spicy. I guess we could have pad thai. No, I mean, I haven't a stomach at the moment, Phil said. You never did, Mary said bitterly. She began to cry. Phil closed his eyes again. He reopened them at their wedding. Mary stood by him beneath an altar of hollyhocks. They held hands facing each other in front of dozens of smiling, chattering family and friends, sitting on lawn chairs as they waited for the justice of the peace to speak. As Phil closed his eyes beneath the altar, he saw far into the future. There was Mary, resting in an armchair by the fire of their farmhouse. Her long hair was now silver, her face wrinkled, but sitting next to her by the fire, Phil saw only the raven-haired beauty shining atop golden Venetian sheets. Nothing had changed. Theirs was an undying love. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren bustled noisily about on the farmer's porch, then came in twos and threes to give hugs and kisses and love, boundless love, to Mary and Phil. Then all were sitting at the long dining table. Platters of roast turkey, stuffing, and homemade cranberry sauce were passed from one smiling relative to another. Phil beamed. Surely his heart would burst. We've done well, haven't we? Look what a lifetime together has wrought. He leaned into Mary and whispered, we'll love each other this way forever. You're wrong, Mary said. Phil opened his eyes to see the smudged glass, the clock, the lamp, and Mary sitting on the edge of the bed, eating pad thai with chopsticks from a white takeout carton. The crab, she said. What do you mean? Phil said. Pad thai has crab? In Finding Nemo, Phil, the crab, it dies. Eaten by a shark. Eaten by a shark. Phil closed his eyes. He didn't know what was real. He didn't know if he was dreaming. He hoped he was dead. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move on one more as soon as I can find my script here. And our third reader is Mary Beth O'Connor. And Mary Beth's award-winning memoir, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, describes the child abuse that led to teenage methamphetamine addiction, the chaos of that addiction, and her early recovery, plus how she became a judge. She also publishes op-eds such as in the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, and Recovery Today. Mary Beth's memoir writings have appeared in Memoir Magazine, Awakenings, the Noyo River Review, Fault Zone, Carry the Light, and Raven's Perch. She speaks about addiction and recovery, such as on television, radio, and podcasts, and at conferences and other events. Mary Beth, it's all yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to read a shortened version of my first chapter, My First Shot. When I graduated from my New Jersey high school in 1979, I was an honors student and a junkie. I don't mean I smoked a lot of weed or popped too many pills. I shot speed daily. Methamphetamine to the chemist, crank in my hometown, crystal in modern terminology. I hit a nerve in my right wrist as I injected before the ceremony. When the principal presented my diploma and shook my hand, I bit my lip to suppress the scream that surged from my belly to my throat. Inside the leatherette cover, one note congratulated me for winning the most scholarship money, but another demanded repayment of $62 from a candy sale, funds I had used to score a gram of meth. 10 months earlier, after snorting crank for 3 days, I had fallen into the turbulent sleep of an overdue crash. I clawed my way to consciousness, then focused on the clock radio's fluorescent 7:08. Cindy, I shouted toward my sister's room, is it AM or PM? God damn it, I'm sleeping because it's morning. I threw off the sheets, struggled to a sitting position, and waited for the dizziness to subside. As I stood, I planted my hand on the bed for balance. Trudging to my mirror, I examined the dark roots setting off my nice and easy blonde hair. Smeared mascara framed bloodshot eyes above sunken cheeks. I held up my hand and watched it shake. Shit, I looked like that old drunk at the Silver Fox who spends her days chained to a bar stool. I shuffled to the refrigerator and grappled with a Pepsi tab before I collapsed on the sofa and lit a cigarette. Like every other morning, I snatched my purse from the Formica coffee table and dug for my drug kit. No crank, just a few black beauties. Warm tears spurted down my cold face. It's okay, you have the beauties. Weaker than meth, but at least these pills delivered an amphetamine high. Should I break them open, discard the time-release ebony granules, and snort the powder for a more intense rush? My nostrils ached from overuse, so I swallowed too. As I waited for the energy burst, I smacked my cheeks. Pull it together. You need meth. This early, Bubba's your best bet. If you look trashed, he'll send you home. I spent the next hour constructing Mary Beth. Shower, blowout, hot rollers, another black beauty, frosted blue eyeshadow, maroon shorts, and a breast-enhancing halter top. Scrutinizing my image again, I straightened my shoulders, tossed my hair, and practiced a laugh. Relief, a facade sufficient to hide the depths of my deterioration. I drove my brown 73 Valiant to Bordentown's 4-block city center. High school dropout Bubba worked as a mid-level drug dealer. At 20, he still lived with his parents in a narrow row house. I exchanged pleasantries with his mom as she spread her famous ham salad on Wonder Bread. Help yourself to a sandwich if you get hungry. Bubba beckoned me over, and we walked a couple blocks to spend the day with Matt. His wife at work, the unemployed truck driver, provided a safe haven in a tacit exchange for drugs. Proud of his chiseled body, Matt would use speed and then spend hours weightlifting. Spinning around, I beamed at Matt as he let us in, my mouth watering as we sashayed to the glass kitchen table. Bubba set aside 10 vials filled with speed for clients to pick up throughout the day. He poured a mound of the glistening white crystals from a sandwich-sized baggie and waggled his finger at us. We got to make this last all day, minus the taste I'll offer my customers. From a folded denim sack, Bubba removed a razor blade and silver straw. He chopped the meth rat-a-tat-tat like a sous chef dicing vegetables during the dinner rush. He carved out 3 long lines. As the crank provider, he snorted first. The speed disappeared in an instant. Bubba thrust himself up and knocked the chair to the floor. Man, oh man, my skull's about to explode. He exhaled 4 times in staccato, then waved me over. As the woman and his occasional sex partner, I had second dibs on the drugs. After pecking him on the cheek, I sidled into position. I rolled the metal cylinder between my fingers, then bent down, pressing a finger against my right nostril to increase the suction of the left. I moved the straw along the line as I attempted to ingest the crank. God damn it, nothing. Months of heavy drug use had clogged my nose. Despite several efforts, I couldn't inhale the speed. Matt scraped my line into a pouch he made of tissue. I swallowed, then gagged when the damp paper clung to the inside of my throat. Panic threatened to engulf me as I choked. Bubba jumped to his feet and nabbed a bud. After several swigs, I gargled to propel the crank toward my stomach. Matt already had snared the silver straw. I fixated on him as he vacuumed up his portion. Fuck, that's good shit. Bubba nodded with pride, grabbed a deck of cards from the hutch, and began to shuffle. Matt skittered around the apartment, arranged magazines, and scrubbed a Teflon pot with steel wool. Clutching my half-empty pack of Salems, I shifted to the olive green recliner and waited for the slower impact from ingesting the drug. Leaning back, I propelled the footrest forward. 30 seconds later, I slung my legs over the chair's side. My Dr. Scholl's sandals flapped as I jiggled my feet. Renoir's luncheon of the boating party hung above the buffet. My mother had purchased a larger version of the same print at Quaker Bridge Mall because it was pretty and matched our furniture. A flash of fury overwhelmed me as I recalled my stepfather backhanding me across the face because I hadn't dusted it to his satisfaction. As my second cigarette burned down to the nub, my cheeks began to glow, and a familiar heat traveled from my chest to my fingertips. I tilted my neck and expelled a slow ah. Bubba whirled around. There's my girl. I stretched my arms to the ceiling, then shimmied my shoulders. Bouncing over to the pressboard stereo cabinet, I flipped through all 24 albums, then selected Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. The boys joined me in the living room to wait for round 2. For the next 30 minutes, we debated my drug consumption options. Matt lobbed the nasal spray to me. I tried to draw the liquid in, but to no avail. Why don't you stir it in your soda? Tried that. Nasty taste. Well, sweetie, Bubba said, I think we need to pop your cherry. You're going to have to shoot up. An ecstatic tingle pulsed through my body as I anticipated a new high. To prevent Bubba from witnessing my ear-to-ear grin, which might worry him enough to change his mind, I gathered the paraphernalia. Matt snagged a pristine hypodermic, a set of works, from his wife's dresser. Eyeballing my share, Bubba grasped the razor blade and swept crank from the pile into a tablespoon. Having watched others, I knew how to prepare the shot. Removing the orange cap from the set took more force than expected. I gasped when I heard the resounding snap of success. I drew up a small amount of water and slowly squirted it onto the meth. With the flat end of the plunger, I crushed the particles until they dissolved into liquid. To avoid losing even one drop, I scraped the residue on the spoon's inner rim and watched it flow toward the mixture. I wadded up a tiny piece of cotton, centered that ball in the speed puddle, then positioned the needle against it to suck the elixir into the syringe. To remove any air bubbles, I flicked the plastic barrel and guided the crank to the top. Matt handed me his belt and I tied off my upper arm. Bubba smacked the pit on my inner elbow to raise the blood vessels. I twice clenched and unclenched my hand before making a fist. I slammed my arm on the glass tabletop, almost knocking the ashtray to the floor. Bubba placed the works at an angle, tapping until the point punctured my skin. He wiggled the hypodermic a bit and then withdrew it. You have baby veins, so it's easy to miss. You got to push hard enough so they don't roll, not too hard, or you'll go through them. On the second try, as he eased the tip forward, a minute curl of blood penetrated the syringe. Bubba retracted the plunger and bright red fluid gushed in, mingling with a clear speed. I loosened the belt. He pulled back slightly until a fresh droplet emerged, indicating the needle remained in place. Bubba mainlined the blood speed amalgam with one graceful stroke. My muscles twitched as I visualized the drug racing toward my brain. An ether taste rose from my throat. I gazed upward and coughed. My eyes wobbled in their sockets. Spasms in my gut made me hunch over. Adrenaline and euphoria flooded every cell. A blaze ignited inside me and irradiated the room. Gripping Bubba's thigh, I opened my mouth to describe the shimmering paint, gleaming mirror, and throbbing music, but could not formulate the words or even a thank you. I giggled and held up my palms the way a child does when spotting a stack of gifts. I clutched my seat as the glorious power flowed through me, and I wondered if this is what happiness felt like. I took a deep, elated breath and sang my new mantra, "When can I do it again?"
Wow. Thank you very much. And everybody can come back. So we have some time for Q&A, and I have questions because I'm struck by, we usually only have 2 readers, and there's something about having 3 that gives me this even stronger impression of you take 3 people and you create 3 completely different worlds. And I want to ask you, I mean, I can't ask you that vague a question like, tell me about your world, but I'm going to ask you a little about sort of your world and the form that you chose. And I'm just going to go in order. And partly I write fiction. And so Jennifer, when I hear a mystery, I think, how in heaven's name do you do that? And that's kind of my question. Like, how do you do it? I mean, if you have a mystery, do you think ahead of time? Do you plot it out, or does it come to you as you, anyway, talk a little about writing a mystery.
Sure. I think it depends on the writer, because I know friends who do it totally different. So that's my,
yeah, of course.
Yeah. But the way I do it, I usually have the overarching plot. So I already know roughly how it will go, but I also like to keep the suspense going for myself. So organically, I'll start with the characters and all the suspects, and I'll just do detailed profiles of each one. And they all kind of have a reason for being there, potentially being the killer. Mm-hmm. So as I go throughout the story, then their motives get revealed. And then I think out of that naturally then comes like the killer. I would say that I plot a little bit more than I did in my earlier books, mostly because I need to have an outline ready for my publisher. But I am probably in between a plotter and a pantser. So I'm a little bit like a plantser, or what I've heard of as a flashlighter. So I'll flashlight and see each scene, mm-hmm. and then it'll come to me. And that's how I write the mystery. And it's definitely based on the love of mysteries that I read growing up and just wanting to be in that world.
Do you have a particular author that inspired you?
Well, definitely Agatha Christie is one of the biggest authors that inspire me just for the mystery writing genre. And then for Asian American mysteries, I started out with Daryl Furatani, who did some samurai mysteries, which were the first time I actually read an Asian American author who wrote in that genre.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to move on to Jeffrey with a different but similar question. And again, you occupy a very different world. And this is more a form question, because again, some of this comes out of my own trying to figure things out. How did you choose to write linked short stories as opposed to, say, a novel?
Oh, that's such a good question. how did I write? Well, if I think about this, in the first book, I didn't know they didn't read from that tonight. That was sort of easy because the genesis of that book was wanting to put down on paper stories I've been telling my daughter for many years. And so they started off somewhat as memoirs and CNF essays. However, they're all fictionalized, some not too heavily. The title story in that book, The Black Hole Pastrami, is about my father dying and going to get him a sandwich and he can't taste it yet. But it's still fictionalized. And then once I wrote down a number of family stories I'd been telling her for years off and on, although they're embellished, some of them very embellished, I wanted to just sort of keep writing. And so it sort of continued from that. But what happened is I just loved some of the characters so much that I kept bringing them back to other stories. In the second book, it's somewhat the same thing, you know. I like Mary and Phil so much that when I wrote what is the first story in that book, which is probably the longest one, called The Narcissist Library, about a very bad young guy and the violinist that he moves in with against his sister Mary's advice. I wrote that last, actually, but somehow it just putting Mary and Phil in it just. I don't know. It came to mind, and so the use of characters as secondary characters in some stories, and then as primary characters in the other. I don't have a great answer for you because I don't know quite how that happened. It sort of just happened amorphously. The other thing that makes the book, I think, not necessarily links the stories in terms of the character linkage, but makes it fit a certain style or feel, is that, as I mentioned, although I think all the characters are very realistic, there's an element of magical realism or surrealism, which is really pivotal in each story. And that's just something that I like to do. I like to take regular people like you, not to speak for you, you know, you or me or others, and say, well, what happens if this thing happens to them? They wake up one day and they're head in a jar, or there's a baker who invents a miraculous machine that can turn wheat into water, but the people he works for don't want to bring it to market because it will ruin their business. And my stories generally have started with an idea rather than a person. There's a story in this book called Avram's Miracle, which is this wheat making thing, and it originally started off differently, which was I had this crazy idea. I ran it by my girlfriend Daniela, and I said, what happens if somebody woke up one day and they invented some potion that if you drank it would turn you Jewish? And then they decided to try to spread that across the world. And we decided there might be some problems with that story. And somehow that then morphed into, okay, well, what happens if he invents a machine that will turn water into wheat, and he can give everybody in the world matzah and bagels, and, you know. So it started with an idea. The character usually was very closely behind that and sometimes conceived at the same time. Another story in that book is called The Mirror, about an aging dermatologist who, whenever he looks in this one particular mirror in his farmhouse, he looks younger every time. Even though when his wife looks at him, his belly is sagging and he's wrinkled and he's aging more and more and more. And that started when I was having drinks with friends of mine who have a farmhouse in Egremont, Mass. And the husband, who is a doctor, said, you know, there's one particular mirror at my farmhouse, and for whatever reason, when I look at it, I feel I look better than the others. Wouldn't that make a great story? And I wrote the story that week, and I put him in it as a starting, but it's not really him, you know. Yeah. But a lot of times my characters start with real people, but only as a starting point.
Yeah,
which requires a lot of apology, by the way, in real life.
Well, I can actually see, even as you talk about it, how the source of the stories really comes from all these different stories. It's not like a novelesque through line. So thank you. I think you helped me understand whether you feel like you answered the question or not. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. And the last question is for Mary Beth. And you write memoir. And so I have a slightly different question about this, which is, you know, I have not read your memoir, but I know from the description and from hearing your readings that, you really dug back through difficult times. And I'm wondering how you chose what to include in the memoir.
Yeah. So when I was thinking, going from an IV meth addict in high school to a judge, that was an unusual story, but it was really then what story do I want to present? What do I want the arc of the story to be? And I started reading memoir. I hadn't read a lot. And it seemed to me that a lot of memoirs sort of jumped into the crazy stories of the addiction, the chaos of that, but they didn't really show the context. And there is actually a very strong connection between trauma and mental health and developing a substance use disorder. So I thought it was important to show what led up to me picking up alcohol at 12 and meth by 16. And that involves including some of the child abuse, stories. And I had some sexual assaults in college that caused me to really fall deeper into my meth use disorder, and I kept using until I was 32. So I really felt it was important to show the context and the bigger picture, why that choice to pick up and use and keep using made sense at the time. What was the impetus behind it? That it wasn't out of the blue or inexplicable. There's actually a very understandable reason for it. And so that I thought was important. The other thing is I do have, some of the crazy drug times, but also a lot of reflection about what it meant. But the other thing in the arc of it was I found a lot of memoirs at the end. It's sort of like I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. And that's not how recovery works. And so I thought it was important. I go through the first 3 years of my recovery, not just from substances, but from the trauma. I mean, I had PTSD and I didn't know it. And a lot of people have that combination of things to work on in recovery. And so I really wanted to show that whole picture sort of from the beginning until actually a significant way into my recovery. And that was really a conscious decision about what I thought would be of value. How could I make my memoir be of use? How could I make my story help others? That I just thought that showing that whole picture would be the most useful way to structure the book.
That's great. And in my day job is as a psychologist. So everything you're saying makes a lot of sense in terms of being able to understand the context and how things happen, not just that they happen.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you all so very much. We've run over a couple of minutes, so I'm going to close us off, but those were wonderful readings and I'm going to read all those books now, I'm sure, because they're all really lovely.
Thank you.
So thank you, Jennifer, Jeffrey, and Mary Beth, and to everyone who joined us, whether you've joined us tonight or you'll join us online when you look at the recorded reading. And special thanks to Mark Eichen, who is the Writers' Room former board chairman and our wonderful technology person for tonight. So coming up next, you can join us in the third week of September, and we will have our next reading and the writers will be announced. We'll take August off, as many people do. Also, please join us when our interview series resumes in the fall, the Writers' Room After Hours, and that too will announce who the interviewees will be closer to the time. So the announcements for the readings, the interviews, and any other Writers' Room news can be found on the website and Instagram and Facebook, and we look forward to you joining us. So good night all, and thank you again, readers and listeners alike. Have a wonderful rest of the summer and stay cool. So good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
You.
Thank you all.